Class, I am looking at the instructions for the next assignment, which is due November the 8th. I'm looking in, I found this in the instructions for assignment. So when you scroll down, you'll see the instructions here. You'll want to read through this and note that this particular assignment, you'll use a template that I'm providing. That should make it a little easier to determine what to put in each box. You're going to complete both the content section and the pedagogy section. Let me show you what it looks like. Okay. You'll see it's got content, pedagogy, and technology. The technology section is not due until next week. We'll have the lecture on this next week. You may complete both sections if you would like, and if you think you can read ahead and do this on your own through the readings. But what you'll be graded on for next week is the pedagogy section. So let's look at what's required. Under content, you'll locate the content standard from DPI, and you'll look for supporting technology standard. You'll paste in the entire standard. Only one is needed for the lesson, but you'll identify which content standard you're going to use for the lesson and which technology standard. Here, you're going to describe what skills students might need to be able to master. For example, if it's in dance education, they may need a particular skill in completing a dance presentation. Under the content, this is similar to what we just completed. You as teacher need to be able to describe the content. That doesn't mean describe your teaching methods. It means describing the content itself. If you were going to teach a lesson on phases of the moon, then here you would describe the phases of the moon. This doesn't need to be very lengthy, but 2 or 3, maybe 4 sentences to clearly articulate in your own words what you are teaching. And then the same here, and this probably would be a little shorter, describe any skills the students would gain following instruction. So you can see the difference here in the content section. Under pedagogy, now remember, pedagogy is how you teach. So when planning how to teach, you have to think about your student characteristics. You will describe an imaginary class, and you'll determine what grade level you would like and the number of students, any disabilities they may have. You may describe social and cultural and racial characteristics. You may describe physical disabilities, gifted students, any of those things about students that you need to know to plan the lesson. You want to be sure and identify reading levels and any reading deficiencies students might have, because that's going to be basic in many lessons. Prior knowledge would be any knowledge or skills a student needs before they can complete the lesson. For example, if you're teaching long division and you know that some students don't understand multiplication, then you would need to indicate here that students need to have an understanding of multiplication as repeated addition and have memorized their multiplication tables. Of course, that's not likely to happen, but you as teacher need to identify what is necessary for the students to be successful. In the learning environment, here you describe classroom, how the classroom is arranged, anything that's on the walls that would support the lesson. You might describe a library media center, a computer lab, a field trip, whatever the learning environment is, and anything any resource that's in the environment that would support your lesson. You determine that in advance, and you think about these things in advance. That's part of TPAC. The learning outcomes is very similar to the instructional objectives that you just completed in last week's assignment. So you're going to describe here what students will be able to do, say, write, describe, draw, sing about, perform, present as a outcome from your lesson. And it's very important that the outcomes reflect that original content standard up here, right up here, the content standard. Here you're talking about the instructional methods, and you want to describe these as they may or may not include creative thinking, critical thinking, problem solving. Instructional methods are how you teach, and it would be such things as students will be given a topic, and they will determine a research question to be investigated through inquiry-based learning. That's your instructional method, inquiry-based learning, and they will be given the topic, but they may not be given the question. Then other methods might be students will view a video on bullying and record examples of bullying behavior as they view the video, and that would be the instructional method. Or students might listen to famous speeches from the 20th century and be able to identify the content of speeches by the person speaking. In other words, be able to tell Martin Luther King and what he had to say, be able to tell what John F. Kennedy and what he had to say. That would be your instructional method. And it wouldn't be very difficult to determine if it was creative or critical or problem solving in your instructional method. Other things we've talked about in class are things like if you have a collaborative group project that might use inquiry-based learning with it, or if you as teacher present a slide presentation showing different Native American Indians in North Carolina, then students could turn and share with a partner what were the most important things in the slides, or they might teach each other through peer teaching. You might use jigsaw groups. You might have students dramatize an attitude like selecting healthy foods. You determine what you want your instructional method to be. Here is more of an elaboration on your methods. You'll describe what you'll do, and then you'll describe how the students are engaged. This is TPAC is all about student engagement, meaning the student just doesn't sit and listen. Even if it's a lecture, there's some kind of think sheet or response that students must make to remain engaged in the learning experience. You describe that here. Be sure you determine what level of blooms is the majority of your lesson. If you are going to be having students just recall important information, that's okay, as long as you make it clear that this is information that has to be learned through memory. Now we'll go on to the learning theory. You will identify there's 4 theories, and you're going to identify which of those theories best represents your lesson. Remember, you plan your teaching based on best practices based on theory. and research, and that's why this part is included in TPAC. This last section, how are you going to assess learning outcomes? Pay close attention to the feedback that I gave you in your assignment this past week on methods of assessment. The method of assessment must reflect the original content standard and the learning outcomes or instructional objective. You must be able to connect those two things and often include some of the words that are in the original objective in how you will assess outcomes. Be specific. Let students know exactly what they need to do, say, write, or present so that you can evaluate their learning. The next part is technology. You may stop here for next week and you'll be graded and earn 10 points on the pedagogy section. If you would like to go on to the technology section, you may do that, but you'll need to read ahead all the information in that folder, in the readings folder, about the technology, selecting the technology tool, step by step how you'll use that tool in your lesson, and describe advantages in using that technology. This wouldn't be just a general technology is always exciting for students. You need to determine how the tool is used that makes sure that the student will be successful in the lesson. What are the advantages in that specific tool? The section here where you list resources, be sure you always include titles with URL, and be sure you list every resource and tool that would be used in your lesson. This might be completed this week in addition to the pedagogy section because we have spent the entire semester looking at various tools and how they might be used in a particular classroom activity. So this part you should be pretty familiar with and be able to complete it, but this is all that's required for this week, the pedagogy. If you do complete this section, you must submit it a second time, this entire document, in next week's Dropbox, the technology Dropbox. That's the only way I can post the points and keep up with your documents, because these two assignments, both the pedagogy and the technology, count 10 points. And so if you don't submit it a second time, you won't earn your second 10 points, or potentially your second 10 points. I hope all of this is helpful for you. Email me if you have a specific question about this next assignment. This is preparing you for your final TPAC lesson, which will be due on November the 29th.